All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the fourth and final talk in the 2021 MSSE Industrial Seminar Series. It's another new experience for us with attendees online and here in person, with our speakers connecting to us live through Zoom. Today's talk comes to us through the Technology Leadership Institute and the Center for Medical Device Cybersecurity. So Dan and Bill, take it away.
Thank you very much, Kevin. It is great to be here, and I'll say it's always a pleasure to co-present with my new friend and colleague, Bill Aerts. Do you want to? Am I able to share my slides?
You should be able to. If you could just go ahead and do a new share.
Okay, great. Yep. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. So again, it really is a pleasure to join you. My name is Dan Moradian. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies for a program in the Technological Leadership Institute. It is our MS in Medical Device Innovation. I'm also one of the chairs in the institute. Interestingly, I'm a PhD pathologist by training, so I have no experience in software engineering other than things that I did on my own and many years ago, like many scientists and engineers. I spent many years at the university in the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology as an academic researcher before leaving to join industry. And I've spent 15 plus years in industry in roles in research and development, which is really the perspective I bring to issues related to safety and security. I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Bill Aerts, who's the managing director, and apologies for my typo, managing director of the Center for Medical Device Cybersecurity. It's a new center here at the University of Minnesota. And I will tell you that Bill is a bona fide expert in medical device cyber. And so it really is a pleasure to share the podium with him, and I look forward to you engaging with him and his expertise this afternoon as well. So we're going to start. Bill, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, and then you're up to bat.
Thank you, my friend. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today, not only to spend time with you, but I love this topic. It's unique and it needs a lot more of attention. And so I hope we can have some fun with the conversation. Maybe fun is the wrong choice of words in some cases, but it's very interesting and there's a lot going on, and there's a great need for folks like you, as well as anybody else in any way connected to healthcare, to learn more about this. That will be sort of the sub-theme of my conversation here, is to talk about the need for more people to be working on this, because there's a desperate need for it. Dan, can you show me the next slide? Okay, never mind then. That's fine. You can. Good. We'll start with that. But let me introduce myself a little bit more. I couldn't remember if there's a slide there for me to introduce myself. So my name is Bill Aerts. I am the new managing director of the Center for Medical Device Cybersecurity at TLI, like Dan mentioned, at the University of Minnesota. I'm delighted to be here. I've only been officially in this role for about 3 weeks. However, over the course of my career, I have been a business person. First of all, let me say that I don't have an engineering background. I don't have a technology background. However, I've worked with lots and lots of engineers and lots of technology people. I started about 115 years ago working out of college, and have actually worked in IT security from the very beginning, back when it was barely a topic on people's minds, and I kind of fell into it. But I worked at a data processing place. I worked in insurance. I worked at transportation at the railroad. I worked at Target. In all those cases, I was able to help start up and develop a IT security program. And so I learned how to build things over time and get the right people involved and so forth. And I was lucky enough to lead all of those programs. Then I moved to Medtronic and had basically the same charter to start up the IT security program. They didn't have anybody focused on it. And of course, over time, over about, of course, 10 or 12 years, we built that into a global department and processes and standards and, you know, everything you could think of in terms of cybersecurity, for protecting the environment for not only Medtronic's business, but for all of the patient information that Medtronic has as well. Then I had the opportunity for the last 5 or 6 years to start working on device security. And the big change there was I was able to start working with the engineers and with the R&D organizations around the globe. And after 5 or 6 years of doing that, we created the program, built a staff, developed processes, kind of the same story, however, working with R&D organizations. And I retired there as the global director of product security. After that, I spent about 1.5 years. I actually taught at the Carlson School, talking about technology innovation within the corporate environment, and talked about security a lot there too. And then not too long after that, I was asked to be the executive director of a group called the Archemedies Center for Medical Device Security, now called the Archemedies Center for Healthcare and Device Security. That was founded by Professor Kevin Fu. There's no reason why any of you would know who Kevin Fu was, but if you're ever curious about this topic, he is definitely a person to Google. His last name is just F-U. He's from the University of Michigan, and he founded the Archemedies Center there as a spot for healthcare providers and manufacturers and regulators and researchers around medical device security to have some really great conversations, to talk openly about the topic, to share information, to have events. And so I've been lucky to be the executive director of that for about the last 6 years. I still am the executive director of the Archemedies Center as well. However, I'm even more excited now to be the leader of the Center for Medical Device Cybersecurity at University of Minnesota. The reason it's most exciting is that, of course, Minnesota is the hub for the world for medical device development. And so it's long overdue that there is a center at the university focused on medical device cybersecurity. And while it will have a lot of the same goals as the Archemedies group, actually there's so much more potential here because there's so many other activities and groups and support for this topic of medical device cybersecurity. So enough of my background. This statement here could not be more true. There's never been a better or more important time to learn about and become involved in healthcare medical device security. So why is that? Well, a couple of things that are probably fairly obvious. Technology, of course, is driving innovation around the world, but driving innovation in healthcare as well. And so where technology starts taking over or starts providing new therapies and new services and new data management and new ways of directing healthcare, securing that information and securing the technology and the therapies themselves could not be more important. It's also because they are becoming more interconnected. So we'll talk about the Internet of Things and medical device security and so forth. But really, the main issue is this, that there's not nearly enough people or nearly enough focus on this topic. And much of healthcare is kind of behind the times in terms of technology. In fact, a lot of hospitals that you go to are using 10, 15-year-old devices and machines. And of course, they were never built with security in mind. So there's a lot of concern, a lot of work, I shouldn't say concern, a lot of thought going into how do we address those old devices. But then, of course, how do we integrate security into the products that are being newly developed? And also, how do we deal with the connectivity and the Internet of Things in that regard? So there's great demand for this topic. There's great demand for knowledge in this topic, and there's not nearly enough people or resources dedicated to it. One point to make here, what I don't want, having said all of that, what I don't want to have anybody come out of this with is saying that there's reason to panic and that people are dying because of device security issues. It's not at all the case. In fact, there are very few known cases where a patient's health was impacted by a security issue with medical devices. However, the threat is real. The expanded use of technology, like I mentioned, increases the risk. And with things like the Internet of Things, the potential for issues are much greater. And so it needs to be integrated into the development of products. Great. Let's move on to the next slide. It's always good to start a presentation with some data. I really like this data. First of all, this is from the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council. Another one, that's another thing to Google if you're at all interested in this topic. The Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council is a great organization that brings together hundreds of manufacturers and healthcare providers, as well as consulting groups, that put together this thing called the Joint Security Plan that's focused specifically on healthcare, specifically on medical device security. And they continue to do tremendous work in groups and with the help of a lot of organizations to put together standards and to come up with research and so forth around this topic of medical device security. So again, if you're interested, there's another group to look into. But let's look at the data. 95% of healthcare institutions confirm being targeted for some form of cyber attack. Now, that doesn't necessarily imply that they're all medical device related. You know, they could just be plain data. Well, every company on the planet could probably say 95% of every company on the planet would say that they've been the victim of some kind of cyber attack. That's just the reality of it. And it's a matter of how big the impact is and how well the organization is prepared to respond to it and protect from it. However, you can guarantee that if 95% of healthcare providers have been impacted, certainly a good portion of those impacted healthcare devices and the healthcare systems in one way or another. Again, doesn't mean people died, but it could have financial impact. It could have some therapy impact. It could mean that a service may temporarily be unavailable. There are a whole variety of things that could go wrong that don't necessarily mean the patient is dying, but it could have impact on the delivery of healthcare. And the cost of $5.5 billion, I'm sure that's low for the cost of security on healthcare industry. It's enormous, and oftentimes that cost isn't captured. Back to a point that I just made earlier, there's a 62% increase in the number of connected medical devices in 5 years, which is expected to accelerate. Just like everything else, and you folks know this better than I do, but just like everything else, everything is connected. And more devices are out in the Internet of Things and that are put in your hand or on your body or in your home, which, you know, healthcare never would have thought to be that way before. And so nearly every healthcare device, nearly every healthcare system, I mean, I actually can't think of anything right now that isn't connected in one way or another. And connection means security risk. They're inherently connected. Sorry, I didn't mean to say they're inherently related because all these devices are connected. And the number of connected medical devices will continue to go up. Just think about even in the hospital, the IV pump that sits next to beds of folks in the hospital. 5 years ago, they were never connected. They had monitors and they would regulate it, but now every one of those is connected to the hospital network so that they can be monitored remotely and so that they can be verified that they're delivering the right therapy, and so that hospitals can do their work with fewer nursing hours, for example. And so even in the hospital, everything is connected. There's over 7,000 device manufacturers and small organizations that are challenged with finding security talent. I can tell you, and I know this because I've hired a lot of security people, it's really hard to find people that have security talent. There is absolutely a huge shortage in the millions of jobs, I'm sure, in the United States, certainly in the hundreds of thousands of jobs that are open. That's one of the things that we hope we can do at the university, is to help provide even 4-year degrees that have some focus on medical device cybersecurity. There are degrees, of course, focused on technology security, but what else can we do to bring 4-year degree people to bring cybersecurity into their understanding so that healthcare providers and manufacturers can hire these folks? TLI has a great program for master's programs for technology and security. That's terrific. There just aren't enough of that going on. There's a huge shortage. And again, I would say there's never been a better time. If you're looking for a important and lucrative field to be in, this is it. And then 80% of device manufacturers have less than 50 employees. That's certainly true around the Twin Cities. You know, Twin Cities is a hub for small device innovation, and most of them have far less than 50 employees, and virtually all of them have people that have almost no understanding of the security risks or how to do threat modeling or how to integrate security into the development process. And so there's a tremendous number of devices and companies that are developing new products that don't necessarily have the expertise to build security into their products. And therefore it ends up being added on later, or, integrate, if it's integrated into a system, hopefully that system protects it as well. But there is a tremendous shortage of knowledge and information around this topic. So that kind of sets the stage. Let's move on. So I want to just talk about a very basic concept that's important around security. Let's just talk about IT security in general. A long time ago, this triad of the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are the basic concepts around security in general, around technology security in general, right? Protecting the privacy of information and the confidentiality of sensitive information, protecting the integrity of information, protecting the availability of information so that it's up and running and available. Well, now let's think about this in context of medical devices and or medical technology. Certainly confidentiality is important. You know that, in the last 10 to 15 years, the privacy laws and privacy rules have escalated tremendously, and you're all aware of HIPAA. There's a huge amount of work that has to be done to protect the confidentiality, the privacy of patient information in the healthcare system, as well as healthcare information that doctors may use or other healthcare providers. So clear, that's the easy one, right? That's the easy one to understand, and a lot of work has gone in to do that. But when you think about healthcare and when you think about devices, integrity and availability really matter the most, because integrity means that the device is operating the way it should be, that it's getting the data correct, that it's displaying the right information for the physician or for the nurses to make a decision, that it is operating the same way over time, so that the way it operated yesterday is the way that it operates today. And then availability. What good is a medical device if it's not there and not working? So really, when you think about security in terms of medical devices, the key is this integrity and availability, that is safety, patient safety. And so it's a little bit of a different twist from the typical IT security function, because the criticality of it becomes more and more important, because now you're talking about a human safety. Let's move on. Just let me check my notes here and make sure I'm on track. So the conversation, we still talk a lot about medical devices. And so it's easy to think about, for example, implantable cardio defibrillators and pacemakers. In fact, my wife has one of those as we speak. And also you talk about devices that are in a hospital, like we talked about, the MRI machines and the CT scanners and the surgical room equipment and respirators and ventilators and IVs and that sort of thing. But really, like everything else, healthcare is becoming connected systems. Like I mentioned earlier, almost no devices now don't have some kind of connectivity. And in doing that now, they are connected everywhere. So we have to take a systems view of this threat of device security. It isn't just simply at the device itself. It's the entire chain of information and the entire chain of the technology. So, for example, almost every system now that has particularly IoT devices, they're connected, they have data that goes into the cloud, right? So the cloud environment has to be safe and secure and protect privacy and safety and reliability and availability and all of those things. Also, data being moved all over the place. So a person now that has a pacemaker or a cardio defibrillator can lay in their bed at night, and there's a wireless monitor that sits next to their bed that will read their device, take the data in, send it to the cloud. The cloud will do data analysis, and if necessary, it can send a page to a doctor or to a 24/7 monitoring service that says, hey, there's something significant here. Somebody needs to take a look at this. Or it may actually take action on its own to say, hey, we got to go change the setting on that device in that person's body. That is a connected system where security is critical through that whole process, right? So it's not just about the cool devices, and there are some amazing devices being developed and in use right now. It really is about thinking about it in terms of a healthcare system. You can see this reflected also in when you look at manufacturers. So for example, device R&D, their R&D and development, and IT and manufacturers are becoming one and the same. Those groups used to be distinctly different. There were the IT systems that ran the business, and there was R&D that built the devices, right? I worked at Medtronic all those years. That's exactly the way it was when I joined that company. They barely talked to each other. Well, that's not true anymore. They're almost to the point where they're the same organization, or they have to be highly integrated, because there isn't a device that isn't connected, and there's almost no business system that doesn't need data from devices, or doesn't need data from some of the systems and services that a company like that sells. So those groups are becoming more highly integrated, and security has to be integrated across those two groups. So I mentioned earlier that I helped to start the IT security group at Medtronic, and then I worked to start the device security group at Medtronic. Well, those aren't separate anymore either. They really are pretty integrated efforts now. Although there are separate groups, they work very closely together, and their engineering and technology folks simply have to be able to talk the same language. So, and also if you think about hospitals, in clinical security, the folks that are actually concerned about securing the devices and securing the technology that's used actually in the hospital itself. Again, that used to be different than the IT security groups in hospitals. They secured the business systems and the data management systems. Again, they're very much integrated now. Again, they still have some separate organizationally, but the knowledge and the understanding and the working together has to be fully integrated, because these are all systems. So it makes the challenges of protecting the patient even greater. You don't have just one device to worry about. You have an entire chain of either chain of devices or chain of systems that you have to be concerned about. So a good term to use is healthcare security, not just device security. We can move on, Dan. So let's talk about it from a manufacturer's perspective. So devices from a manufacturer are really run the gamut, and they aren't just devices anymore. There are services and systems that manufacturers provide as well, but they really run the gamut from the old, which is like if you look on the upper right-hand corner there, an IV pump that, like I said, they are all connected now to the hospital network at the least, to a big iron MRI machine that might be in the clinic or even in the hospital setting, all the way down to what on the left there is a pacemaker. Pacemaker now, that's if you look at that compared to the coin, that's literally how big it is. It's literally inserted into the heart itself and has a battery in it, and it paces the heart, and it's programmable from the outside. You know, it used to be, some of you, I don't know how many are familiar, but pacemakers typically have been a device that was installed in the abdomen or in the chest, and then a lead is run from that device down into the heart itself. Well, this is a fully integrated, high technology, equally functional, implantable pacemaker that actually sits in the heart itself. So this gives you an idea. It just runs the wild gamut of different technologies that are needed, high connectivity that's needed, high programmability that is needed. And so from the smallest devices to the largest devices, all of them communicating and moving data around the network and into the internet and into the cloud. The key challenge that manufacturers have, and I think most manufacturers, other than the small ones, but the large ones that have been doing this for a while, is the key byword here is security by design. That means is these products have to be designed with security from the very beginning. Literally, when the company, whoever it is that is saying, we need a new product, here's a product line that we think may be viable. What are the requirements? What would this device do? How would it work? What services, what kind of healthcare therapies would it provide? How would it work in the hospital environment or in the home environment or in the body? At that opening stage is when security has to be started being thought of. In integrating threat modeling, meaning what potential threats could potentially impact this thing, and integrated that into the design. So this idea of security by design is critical. And it takes a while. It has taken a while for the engineering teams at large manufacturers to get this, but we're making a lot of progress in that now. And like I said, I think the real challenge now is with the smaller, the startups and the smaller manufacturers that may not have the expertise, they still have to think about it security by design as well. We're going to talk about in a few minutes the FDA and what they've done to help kind of push that ball uphill in terms of integrating security by design. There's also new methods of secure transmission. You have to think of new ways to do authentication. Just think about, for example, typically when you log on somewhere, right, you have a password or you have a two-factor device that you need to use in order to sign on. Well, you can't really do that with a medical device, right? Device therapy can't be held up by somebody signing into something. And so authenticating devices to a network or authenticating data has to be done in more creative and new high technology ways. But I mentioned this earlier, the real challenge is supporting all of the old devices that manufacturers have out there. Even 10 years ago, security really wasn't built into products. There was a lot of skepticism as to why they would ever have to be. And so there's lots of old technology out there that are operating with old operating systems. I mean, you'd be surprised and a little scared. There are plenty of systems, either just plain PCs or servers, but also devices themselves that are running on Windows 95 at hospitals today. That gives you an idea of how old the technology is. And so there are plenty of old technology out there. The other thing that to note is that hospitals will continue to use capital devices as long as they work. If they're 20 years old, it doesn't matter if they work. And so hospitals can't afford to do a normal capital upgrade of all their stuff. Like every 3 years, they replace all their technology. There's just not enough. There's not enough money for that. And so there's plenty of old technology that works fine. But again, is it able to operate in this highly connected, highly vulnerable world? And so there's a lot of things that are going on to help deal with these old devices, like doing network security checking. Even though this old device that doesn't have security built into it, maybe it's the network traffic that's monitored and controlled, for example. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit when we talk about what the healthcare providers are doing. Finally, one more thing. The manufacturers are also under great pressure from the regulators and from healthcare providers. HDOs now, health delivery organizations, are now making part of the procurement process demanding to know any devices or systems that they're buying from manufacturers. How secure is it? Do you meet our requirements? How does encryption work? How do you move data? How secure is the product itself? What happens if it fails? Does it fail in a safe mode? And so the manufacturers are feeling the pressure from their customers saying, we need to build more secure products. And also we need to be able to validate and verify that in fact the controls are in place. So what documentation do we have? What sort of testing have we done? All of those things are putting pressure on manufacturers to do a better job. Let's move on. So let's talk about the hospitals now, the health delivery organizations. They have tremendous challenges. I have already touched on that a little bit. And that is that, they deal, well, 2 or 3 things. One of them is they still use a lot of old technology. And I mentioned that earlier. The second thing is that they have the most complex and unique networks in the hospitals. There's no 2 hospitals that are the same in terms of the network. If you go to a corporation and you go to a Target store, every Target store is the same set of systems. It's all controlled. It's all the same stuff, right? Not true with hospitals. There's a saying that if you've seen one hospital, you've seen one hospital, because they are not common. Their networks are all unique. And a big part of that is because of the choice of systems and devices and equipment that they use in each hospital. They buy equipment and devices from a wide variety of different vendors and suppliers and manufacturers. And so to put that all together in a way that is constant and consistent is very difficult to do. And so one of the big challenges that hospitals have been working on, and have made a lot of progress now, there finally are tools in place, but 5-7 years ago, the real challenge was, how do we even know everything that's connected to our network? And how do we know that everything's configured? All those devices, are they configured securely? And what operating system are they on? And what controls in place? And what data are they transmitting? And how often should they be on the network? And how much data should they be transmitting? And so that diversity is what makes the hospital networks very difficult to manage. They're a real challenge. Now, one of the tools that's come along recently in the last, like I said, 5 years or so, is there are tools that now can go out and, I'm trying to think of the right term. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting it now. There's a name for these tools, but network monitoring tools, but they're specifically designed for healthcare. They have the ability to go out and ping devices, anything that's hanging off the network, and ping the device and find out everything it can that's available about the security or the configuration of that device. What's the operating system? What security controls might be on or not? What kind of data is being sent in and out of that device? How often is it on the network? Is it on? Is it turned on all the time, or is it off sometimes? Any information that might be relevant in terms of managing the devices. And at first, what hospitals were finding is, my God, we had no idea all these devices were hanging off of our network. They didn't even know what they were in a lot of cases. But now, certainly the large and the at least mid-sized hospitals now are developing this capability with these tools to at least find the devices, have some sense of how they're connected, have some sense of how they're configured, and now can start working on trying to say, look, these shouldn't even be on here. Let's get them off the network. These are so badly out of date. Can we patch them? These should be configured differently. These may need to be isolated in their own segment on the network to protect them. There's a whole bunch of actions now that they can take. Another interesting thing, just an interesting story about that, is one of the major concerns that when these new tools came out to do the network monitoring, there was a lot of issues with whenever this tool would go out and ping. I hope you understand what I mean by ping. Send it some data to see if it responds. That it would actually crash the device because they were so old and the devices had no intention of anybody talking to them per se. And so that was a really big issue at first, is these tools would end up taking down devices all around the hospital just by doing a ping. And so over time, those tools have been developed further. Let's see, I want to talk a little bit more about hospitals. So the clinical security folks at hospitals have a huge challenge, right? They're dealing with a lot of old technology, not all of it, but a lot of old technology. They have all these devices of a variety of different kinds of vendors, of a variety of different kinds of suppliers. They also have a lot of people coming in to help them with their network integration. So there's third parties that come in and help them install and manage devices and new technologies around healthcare. And then there's also the physical part of it, right? Devices that get moved. You know, you'll see lots of devices and infusion pumps and pacemaker programmers and portable MRI devices that are moved all around the hospitals. How do you keep track, and when do they plug into the network, or are they wirelessly connected, and how secure is that wireless connection? This is why more and more hospitals, as I mentioned earlier, are demanding more upfront understanding of the security capabilities, devices, and systems that they're buying from manufacturers now. Because they've now said, look, we have to have devices that at least meet this certain level of security capability. And these devices are the types that will work best in our network. And so they're beginning to have a lot more say in what comes into their hospital and how it's managed. And they are demanding more support from the manufacturers. One final thing. That is, when a new vulnerability is discovered in technology, and there are hundreds or thousands of vulnerabilities discovered in technology every single day, the process of figuring out, does that new vulnerability that was just discovered in a piece of software, and a piece of firmware, and a piece of shareware that might be part, first of all, is it even part of any devices in my hospital? Secondly, what do we do to deal with it? And third, what can the manufacturer tell us? Is there a patch, whatever? We're going to talk about that process a little bit more in a little bit when we talk about the FDA, But that's a huge issue, right? So it isn't just getting the devices on your network and configured and being able to monitor them with the monitoring tools and so forth. It's managing new vulnerabilities that are discovered, and how do you manage that part of it for all of these diverse environments. So I want to take just one more step back before we move on, because I want to say again what I said earlier. Everything I'm saying makes it sound like everything's about to die, about to explode. That's not the case. This is all being managed well. There still aren't any good, there are very, very few cases where any kind of security threat has been directly connected to death, has been directly connected to health. There have been a few, but this is still being managed very, very well. It's simply that as devices get older, as more get connected, as more devices are implanted, as technology comes more into the home, the threat continues to increase. And so we have to continue to manage up to that increasing threat. Next slide, Dan. So then let's talk about IoT for healthcare. You guys know about this, right? I mean, healthcare now is in your hands. It's on your phone, right? It's on devices that you have on yourself. It's your watch, right? It's technology that you can bring with you and take with you anywhere. There are plenty of unique devices that can take blood pressure, right? Like the Peloton type connect systems. There's just about almost anything that you can do can almost certainly be done in your hand, on your body, in your home, and it's going to continue to increase that way. Well, this is great, right? But again, we're back to that connectivity equals increased risk. And so there's this amazing volume of new devices coming out, being brought into the market that people are using, and healthcare is saving money, and that you don't have to go into the clinic to get care, and that you can stay in your home and get care, and you don't have to go to the hospital in some cases, and that you can take better care of yourself and monitor your vitals and manage your drugs more effectively. But all of these new devices, all these new technologies are being pushed out there as fast as possible, right? That's the way of the way that IoT works. The faster that you can get it out there, the faster you can get the market to better. But what does that mean? Are they really building adequate security into these products? Now, yeah, in some cases they really are. If you think about the iPhone, for example, that platform, and to a large degree, Android as well, but frankly, iPhones are more secure than Android still. But when you think about that, the iPhone, the technology there is pretty secure. It's in pretty good shape. But there are other products that are out there that aren't necessarily. And so it's really an interesting challenge. The volume of devices going out into the world is going up exponentially. And yet, are we managing all those connections? Are we managing all those devices? Are we sure that the data is going to be sent correctly? This is an interesting one. I want to go back to the Archemedies Center and Professor Kevin Fu at the University of Michigan. There's also a lab, the Archemedies lab, that has done a tremendous amount of research. In fact, that's how Dr. Fu originally became famous, was that he did some seminal research showing that implantable cardio defibrillators were in fact vulnerable. This is about 12, 13 years ago now. But recently his lab did some research on sensors. So sensors that are, on the watch, that are part of just about any device you can think of. And how can they be impacted? Sensors are in fact quite vulnerable to things like heat and temperature and sound and vibration. And he's shown that where sensors can give false readings if they're not in the perfect environment. Well, how many devices are out there? I mean, sensors are what make IoT work on technology, on pieces of technology. And so that's another security type threat, right? It's a vulnerability that the device may have. Also showed that, for example, smart devices, smart speakers, Alexa and Siri and all those, that they can be from hundreds of yards away. You can input a command into a device using a laser. Sounds bizarre, but realistically, I mean, that proves that they are vulnerable as well. You can get an Alexa device to do certain things just by pointing a laser at it from hundreds of yards away. And so it's another part of this IoT for healthcare. It's terrific. There's an explosion, but sensors are vulnerable. These devices may not be 100% secure. And so again, there's vulnerability there. It's being managed, but more needs to be done. We need more people that are part of designing these products that are knowledgeable about security and can think about the threats and the vulnerabilities that these devices may have and the data that they carry. Next one, Dan. So what are the regulators doing? So the FDA is really the world leader in terms of regulating devices, security for medical devices. Most of the world waited for quite some time to wait to see what the FDA, what the Food and Drug Administration was doing around this. Now, around the globe, most large nations, and certainly many smaller ones also, now are actually adding regulations around medical device security within their own countries. They are almost all a reflection of what the Food and Drug Administration has done. And so I'm just going to focus on that, but know that there is a global effort to build regulation and requirements around security of medical devices in healthcare. But the Food and Drug Administration is the best way to talk through it. First of all, again, here's another Google search if you're interested, but down at the bottom there, you can see there's a click stream that I added in there. If you go to fda.gov, if you search on medical device, click Digital Health Center of Excellence, and click on cybersecurity. If you just search through that, you'll find a page there that has a tremendous amount of information about how the FDA is dealing with medical device cybersecurity. It talks about workshops that it's done. It shows you the primary guidances that are available around it. It provides other like fact sheets, things that the FDA has published to kind of clarify murky issues around this topic. So that is, again, if you're interested in this, and I hope you are, please go out to that page. It's a wonderful page of all sorts of information that you can scroll down and find all sorts of cool stuff. Anyway, I'm going to talk about two documents that the FDA has been working on over the last 5 or 7 years that aren't anywhere near the breadth and depth of what the FDA is doing, but they're great ways of describing what they do, and they are the primary documents. There's one document called the Pre-Market Requirements for Medical Device Cybersecurity. That's not exactly the title, but the key is that it's pre-market. What needs to be done before the device is sent out into the world? And then there's a post-market guidance, meaning what has to happen after the device is sent out to the world. So let's talk about the pre-market guidance. This has been probably the single document that has done the most to advance medical device cybersecurity and to push the industry to do better of any other document there is out there. And basically what it says focuses on is integrating security into the design of new products. And the most challenging is the process of risk vulnerability assessment. So how do you try to anticipate the threats and vulnerabilities that this device may be subject to when it's out in the real world, meaning when it's out connected to a network, when it's in the home, when it's implanted in a body, when it's used in the hospital. And how do you do that? And then defining and testing those controls that you put in place that you hope will address those risks as you're developing the product along the way. Then documenting all the steps that were taken along the way, and all should be able to prove that the FDA, that the necessary controls do exist for their consideration and approval. So the hammer that the FDA has, they say, here, you need to go through these steps. You need to integrate security into the development process. You need to do threat management and risk modeling. You need to do testing. You need to document all the steps that you've taken along the way to integrate security into the process. And when you come to get the device approved, you need to prove to us that you've done all of that. And if you don't, your product won't get approved. And in fact, devices have been declined for approval because they don't have adequate security proof or security controls built into their products. The pre-market guidance is currently undergoing a redraft that won't be coming out anytime real soon, but it will substantially update it with some more significant requirements for manufacturers, not the least of which is a thing called SBOM, the Security Bill of Materials. Remember back, I mentioned earlier about when a new vulnerability is discovered in a particular piece of software that is made known around the world, right? A manufacturer, a software developer, or a company that manufactures Microsoft or Apple or NVIDIA or all the technology companies out there, they discover there's a vulnerability in one of their pieces of software. Well, medical devices are just another piece of technology when it comes right down to it. So how does a manufacturer and how does the healthcare provider that uses it or the person that uses that device, how do they know whether that vulnerability discovered in that piece of software may have impact on their device or their system, right? So you need to have a list basically of here are all the security and software components that are in this device or in this system, so that when a vulnerability is discovered, you can compare it and say, oh, that doesn't affect me because that piece of software or that vulnerability isn't present in my device. Or it is, and what's the next step to resolve it? Now think about that. These devices and systems are immensely complex, as complex as any technology in the world. And so having the manufacturers being able to not only produce the list of all the components that are part of that product, but also keep it up to date with software, as software are updated and so forth. How do you keep that list up to date? Secondly, how do you provide that in a way that's useful to the healthcare provider? And how does the healthcare provider sift through all of that information? So this idea of the security bill of materials is the newest thing in this pre-market guidance, and it's a huge amount of work. That's part of the reason why the guidance hasn't been released yet, is because they're giving manufacturers and healthcare providers plenty of time to contemplate this. But if you think about it, it's really the only way a rational person can figure out whether a new vulnerability impacts devices and may impact patient safety or just the functionality of a system or device. I hope that makes sense. Need a drink of water. 1 second, please. Excuse me. Actually, Dan, you can go back. I'm sorry. Yeah, thanks. FDA. I mentioned there's post-market guidance. So now there's also guidance that was put out a couple of years ago for devices after they've been put out into the public. This talks about, first of all, how do you respond as a manufacturer when a vulnerability is discovered? How do you communicate with the healthcare provider? Well, that SBOM is part of it, right? But even without that, if there are vulnerabilities to discover, the manufacturer has an obligation to support the healthcare provider or whoever the user is of the device or the system to help them resolve that open issue. There also has to be tracking of the devices. Where are they? How are they being used? Are they connected? Someone has to be keeping track of all of that and monitor whether there's changes in the environment. There also has to be a plan for disposing of the device when it's afterlife, right? What do you do with, for example, a pacemaker that's implanted in someone and then they pass away? What happens to that? Sometimes they get disposed of as part of the body. Sometimes they're explanted and disposed of, but there's data on there that might have privacy implications. And the same is true with any kind of device, either an IoT type device or a hardware, a big capital hardware device that might be in a hospital. They contain enormous amounts of data. They have technology that might be proprietary. How do you dispose of them when they're end of life? There are plenty of other things. I don't want to go into too much detail because I've already spent enough time on this, but that's another huge part of what the FDA has done, set the standard for what manufacturers and those that are using and those that are buying healthcare devices have to follow, and they are highly regulated and highly monitored. And now the rest of the world, the international community, is using the FDA model for defining standards and requirements that go across the globe. Now we can move on. Thank you. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Brian Krebs. He's actually local. He's a fascinating guy. If you don't know about Brian Krebs, another good search. He puts out a tremendous amount of really interesting stuff around technology security. And as probably some of you know, ransomware is a huge threat in healthcare. I haven't even mentioned that yet, and it's a huge part. But ransomware has been hitting hospitals in a major way for 3 or 4 years now. In fact, in Europe, the National Health Service in England, about half of it was brought down one day because of ransomware. In fact, there were patients that had to be helicoptered to other hospitals and so forth because systems weren't available. I'm going to assume you all know what ransomware is, right? It's unwanted software that goes in and encrypts all the data of any system it finds and therefore makes it unavailable. And then the people that sent that bad code to that location say, pay me money and I will help unencrypt your data for you. Well, it's a huge deal. And in fact, there are plenty of companies that are still getting hit. And in fact, I have a friend who works at a local mid-sized healthcare company that develops testing equipment for healthcare. They have a local office here. They're actually based in France, but they got hit by ransomware not too long ago, right? And so for a couple of days, they really had to, they shut down all their operations and they ultimately were able to recover from it. But there are plenty of places that can't. What I wanted to just say is ransomware is a huge deal in healthcare. And the reason that is ransomware, they're smart enough to attack critical infrastructure because they know that's what will have the greatest impact. You may recall it probably was, I don't know, 4 or 6 months ago now, but that a gas line company that provides gas to natural gas to the East Coast had a massive ransomware hit where a lot of the East Coast was without gas for quite some time. That's because, again, it's critical infrastructure. And we're looking. And is that the last one then? Oh, just back to saying that like I said at the very beginning, this industry needs more help. If you have any inkling of being interested in this, I'd say pursue it, because there's huge opportunity doing something that really matters, and it can be pretty lucrative too. And with that, I thank you. I guess I went longer than I ever imagined I would, but hopefully that was useful.
Thanks, thanks, Bill. Kevin, it might be a good time to take a break. In fact, I think it is a good time to take a break. If it works for you, we can take what do you normally do? We'll follow your lead.
Yeah, either a 5-10 minute break would be great.
Okay, let's do that. I'm going to try to, I probably have an hour's worth of content. I've got more slides than Bill, but I'm not as knowledgeable. So I won't. I'll stick to the slides for the most part. So if we take 5 or 10 minutes, I think we'll get to 3, and we'll have time for some questions and things. Or I mean, we'll get to about 2:30 and we'll have time for questions.
All right. We'll take, that's just short of 10 minutes. We'll do 1:35. We'll come back.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thanks again, Bill.
My pleasure.
And I don't know if you intend or want to stay on. Obviously, you're welcome to stay. But if you've got other plans on this Saturday afternoon, you can take your leave.
I'll hang on. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.